I'm going to talk about the advantages of balanced risk allocation in underground works contracts. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation of Professor Gan before, and also the project manager of the Jakarta Bandung project, where they stated that important decisions are taken at the beginning, that you need an excellent consultant, that early contractor involvement is interesting, and also that you should invest money in the front-end engineering design because most important decisions, again, are taken at the beginning. So next, please. Why balanced risk allocation? Next. There's a difficulty for the industry to guarantee cost and time stability. We have high cost and we have time overruns. We have project disruptions, we have contractor bankruptcy, we have high costs for disputes through litigation or arbitration, which all adds up to making projects more costly. Gambling is not the way you can contract a project. You can only take risks that can be calculated as a contractor. Next. Best practice in the past, and this is a statement that ITA has made already in the early 2000s, is found in contracts with balanced risk allocation. Now, the main difficulties are found regarding unsuitable procurement and contracting strategies. Next. Geological, hydrogeological, geotechnical uncertainty inherent to underground construction. This is, of course, an important factor. We're going to places nobody has ever been. We have lack of proper risk management, and the investment cost by the contractor in equipment is extremely high, which means we have a high portion of time-related cost when it comes to underground works. Next. Why balanced risk allocation? Again, risk allocation will make projects less costly. If we have all the risk allocated to the employer, there will be no incentive to the contractor to perform and project costs will go up. If we have all risks assigned to the contractor, like in an EPC contract, the contractor will have two choices. He may either calculate all the risk in his bid, which means the bids will go up, or he may speculate and then try and claim the cost he lacks, which also means that costs will go up. If we have a balanced risk allocation and the contractors know this, you will have lower bids, you will have more tenders, because more people will be willing to take risks as they're balanced. You will have less disputes, and you will have better cost stability. Next. What do we expect from a good contract? When we're talking about what I would call conventional contracts, I'm not talking about alliancing contracts. Alliancing contracts would be a new model that might be envisaged when it comes to very large and very complex contracts. But a good conventional contracts will allocate the risks clearly to one party or the other. It will clarify what is required and what conditions are to be expected. We're talking about employers' requirements, and we're talking about the cut between the expected and the unexpected. Then a good contract will specify what to do in case of changes to requirements and in case of changed conditions against the expected. It will give us a guideline on how to behave. It will minimize the probability of disputes through clear prescription on risk mitigation, what should be done to mitigate risk. And a good contract also specifies what to do in case of a dispute. It's a little bit like a marriage. A marriage contract is there only in the case you don't get along. As long as you do get along well, you don't really need a contract. You need the contract once you don't get along. So the contract should also specify what should be done when you don't get along anymore. Next. Now, in underground works, what is specific to underground works amongst other features, of course, is that we go underground, which means that the ground is central to the project. It's also central to costing and everything. So the ground and groundwater risks should be assigned to the employer or to the owner, because the employer is the party who will benefit from a completed project, and it's also the party that can best control these risks through a proper front-end engineering design and through the assessments that need to be made during front-end engineering design. So if the ground is worse than anticipated, the employer should pay, and if the ground is better than anticipated, the employer should take the profit. It's not one way, this is two ways, which means that if the ground is better, there should be a profit to the employer. Vice versa, the production-related risks in any given ground should be assigned to the contractor as the party who will most benefit from high production rates and as the party who can best control the production-related risks. So if production is lower than anticipated in a foreseen ground, the contractor may incur a loss. If production is better than anticipated in an anticipated ground, the contractor should get the profit. Next. Here's an example. Let's see, we have a foreseen geology of solid rock with one difficult fault zone of 500 meters. This has been assessed during front-end engineering design. Contractual time for completion is 3 years. We have two axes, one from the left, one from the right, and the brown difficult fault zone of 500 meters. Now we start digging. This is a hard rock tunnel. Next, please. The really encountered geology is a very difficult fault zone of 1.2 kilometer plus one intrusion of extremely hard ground of 800 meters. The real time for completion is 4 years, although the performance of the contractor is as per contract and the cost increase is 30%. Now, I don't think we do have contractors around the globe that can take a 30% risk systematically because they don't get 30% profit. In construction, you will get a precious few percentage points of profit. So you cannot take a cost increase risk of 30%. This is something that cannot be taken, which means that in this case, the risk of the contractor walking away, of the contractor going bankrupt, or at least of extremely costly disputes will be extremely high. So we should do something about that. Next, please. Now, how can ground-related and other risks be allocated properly? I'm only talking here about tunnel-specific risks, underground work-specific risks. We have unknown ground the risk of unknown ground conditions, of course. We need to have a clear definition of what's known. Now, in the Emerald Book, we propose a solution which is called a geotechnical baseline report, which is the only source of assignment of the risk of foreseeable or unforeseeable ground conditions. We may have longer or shorter time due to changed ground conditions, not to change performance of the contractor. The changed performance of the contractor will always remain a contractor's risk, but longer or shorter time due to changed ground conditions, worse ground or better ground. We have an adjustment. We need to adjust the time for completion, which means that if the ground is worse and if the excavation is on the critical path, we may need to award an extension of time for completion, as well as a reduction of time for completion if the ground is better than anticipated. In the Emerald Book, we provide a schedule of baselines, which is sort of bill of quantities for time. And we also provide examples for that. Time-related costs may be higher or lower due longer or shorter time than what was foreseen due to changed ground conditions. In order to allocate risk of that kind properly, we need a provision for cost in case of extended time for completion. In the Emerald Book, we provide time-related cost rates you may use. We may have varying quantities of given ground classes. We may have in our project a series of ground classes that need to be faced by the contractor when he does the works, and the quantities may vary, and they certainly will vary. So we need to adjust the contract price. This we will do for excavation and lining through a bill of quantities. We may have time and cost. We will have time and cost of handling of unforeseeable ground conditions. When we run into unforeseeable conditions, there will be a time and there will be a cost. And there's a right for the time and for that cost, which may go through a claim. But if we do have a mechanism that allows us, which has been contractually specified, that allows us to provide for correct payment according to the effort, we don't need to claim, and where there's no claim, there's no dispute. In order to do this, we have, again, the schedule of baselines that can be used, and we have day work rates, which I strongly recommend anybody to put into their bills of quantities in order to have day work rates that have been tendered under competition. And then, of course, there's no guarantee against disputes. We may have disputes in an underground job, although we may have a very fine contract, we may have disputes. So what's interesting there is to prevent disputes as much as possible, and in case of a dispute, to have a swift resolution that keeps the cash flowing, because the contractor needs to know what he's likely to be awarded, and the employer needs to know what he's likely to have to pay. And so we need to have a provision for this. What we suggest, and this is standard in the newer FIDIC contracts, if you go by FIDIC, you can use this. If you go by other contract forms, you may use a similar provision, a standing dispute avoidance and adjudication board that will give an advice which will be binding on the parties unless and until overthrown in front of a tribunal or in front of an arbitration tribunal. Next, please. Now, what is the Emerald Book? The Emerald Book is a standard FIDIC book. It's actually a yellow book with a toolkit for contracts with particular ground-related risks. That's all we did. We just took a yellow book and we added a few tools to provide for whatever goes with ground-related risks. So it's easy to use. If you go by FIDIC, the Emerald Book is a good idea to use. If you go by other standards, you may just take the important portions that we've used in the Emerald Book and transfer them. The geotechnical baseline report, or a similar provision that allocates ground risks properly, time-related costs, time extension and time reduction, and so on. Next, please. So, what should be done before tendering? We're talking about the front-end engineering design and whatever comes before tendering. We need a competent owner, including all the owner's advisors. So we need a competent consultant. We need an excellent consultant. We need a feasible tender design, which means that the employer should provide a feasible tender design before he goes to tender, including complete terms of reference, including a balanced risk allocation for parts with uncertainty. This may be the ground, this may be other things. It may be, I think Professor Gahn was talking about exchange rates and so on. So we need to have all of this. So we need preliminary investigations when it comes to a feasible tender design. We need a proposed construction methodology. The employer should be sure that his tender design is feasible, so he should, in his front-end engineering design, also reflect on the construction methodology he wants to suggest. An adjustment mechanism for time and cost, which means we need bill of quantities, we need a schedule of baselines. A provision for dealing with the unknown, which means I would suggest, again, a schedule of baselines, and I would suggest day work rates. Yes, please. Next. Yes. And we need a risk register, of course. And we need this provision for alternative dispute resolution. We don't want to go to tribunals, and if possible, we don't want to go to arbitration. We want to know quickly what happens. Arbitrations are extremely costly, and they take a long time. Next, please. Yes, so we need a standing DAAB. Now, again, what should be done before tendering? The tender will lay the grounds for the best possible value. Next. For a clear contract, for a smooth delivery, and for comparable bids, which are important. Now, what does this mean? Terms of reference, requirements, transparent rules for the bid and evaluation process. It's important to have transparent rules in order to have a comparison between bids that are on a level playing field. Best possible value. What does best possible value mean? Is this price only? Is it price and quality? Do we have incentives for particularly good quality or for particularly swift delivery? What about early contractor involvement? We need to have, in a clear contract, unambiguous formulations. We need provisions for the case of different interpretation of the contract, which may be a dispute avoidance board and so on. Next, alliance or exchange of performances. This is a very important question that the employer will have to ask themselves. In parts of the world, the exchange of performances contracts, the classic contracts where we have an employer that pays and we have a contractor that builds, have been replaced by alliancing contracts where the risks are not allocated in a more or less balanced way, but are shared properly, which is, of course, a different kind of looking for delivery. And smooth delivery, we need to have a proportionate regulation, we have good equipment, we need to have human resources, and so on. Next. Of course, we want to have people that focus on projects. Now, before tendering, what do we look at? We look at a procurement strategy. How much does the owner want to be involved in the delivery? Next. Do we want early contractor involvement, yes or no? What selection model will we pick? Will we have a price only selection, or will we have a price and quality based selection? What are the boundary conditions? What are the requirements? And then when it comes to underground works, what are access conditions? What are surface conditions? And what are the ground conditions we need to take into account? All of this needs to flow into the tender. And then we have principles of common sense. The owner knows what and describes it properly, meaning that we need to have a competent owner and a competent consultant of the owner. The contractor knows how and is able to give a price tag and a time frame to what is asked from him. A written contract is most useful when the parties disagree. This is, of course, standard. We need written contracts, and the contract should say how to deal with the foreseen and how to deal with the unforeseen. Now, when we say that the owner knows what and describes it properly when it comes to the excellent consultant, of course, everything starts with choice of the consultant. Can we go back, please? Please go back one. Yes. I'm still talking about the owner knows what and describes it properly. I think Professor Gans said we need an excellent consultant. Now, there's a saying that says, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And you don't want monkeys for consultants, with all respect. But if you want a good consultant, if you want a good consultant, the choice of your consultant should also be quality and price-based and not only price-based. Next, please. Now, when it comes to procurement strategy, what do we look at? Of course, at the financial capacity. Next. Next, please. The complexity of the project. If we have a non-complex project, an easy project, we will not need sophisticated contracts. We will do a market survey in order to make sure that we will have as many tenders as we'd like. We have to know at the technical capacity we have. We need to have technical capacity. We should look at our risk aversity. How much risk am I willing to take as an employer? We need to know what our bankers, our lenders will say, depending on the type of procurement we're looking at. We need to look at our banks and our lenders' conditions. We need to see what the social and environment contour of the project is, and of course we need to see what the legal framework is. And this will all flow into, next, a financing model. You'll have to see how this is going to be funded. Is this going to be conventional or is it going to be an alliance contract? Next. And if it is a conventional contract, is it a design bid build, or is it a design build, or is it an EPC contract? As I said before, when we're in a situation of uncertainty, which may be ground related, which may be policy related, which may be related to very floating exchange rates and so on, an EPC contract is not a good idea because no contractor can take the risks that are related to that kind of uncertainties. Do we have a model contract or do we have a bespoke contract? Do we have standard general conditions or do we have our own general conditions of contract? What design level will I have when I go to tender? Will I have a front-end engineering design which is very precise, or will I have a very raw front-end engineering design? The more risk I want to shift to the contractor, the more precise my design must be. I cannot go to an EPC contract without knowing anything about what I want. And what about early contractor involvement? Do I want to have the contractor involved as quickly, as soon as possible, because I want to take profit from the contractor's competence? Can I do this based on my front-end engineering design and on my risk appetite? I think this was my last slide. Let me check. This would have been slide number. Let's see. Yes. A couple of useful papers that I might recommend. Of course, the FIDIC conditions of underground works, the Emerald Book is an interesting feature. We do have a guide to the FIDIC Emerald Book. We have the ITA Contractual Framework Checklist for Subsurface Construction Contracts, which I would recommend, and also a Code of Practice for Risk Management in Tunnel Works, done by the ITA together with the tunnel insurers. And we will publish, and I would invite you all to come to Stockholm to the World Tunnel Congress 2025 in May, because there we will present the guidance on the NEC contract forms and underground works. I think this is all. Thank you very much for your attention.